All right, good morning, everybody. Back with another episode of Pick and Pop, taking a look at what happened last night in Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals, with a few other things going on, including the draft lottery that happened a couple nights ago that I kind of forgot to discuss yesterday. Just remembered that, and of course, the award finalists that the NBA announced for all of the major awards, and then this is the second year that they're doing an award show that'll be going on at the end of June. But of course, a big game last night with Game 2 between the Warriors and the Rockets, which a lot of people are basically saying is, for all intents and purposes, the finals. I wouldn't rule out a team from the East being able to beat the Rockets. I think I've already discussed, I don't really think either the Cavs or the Celtics could beat the Warriors in a 7-game series. But with that being said, the Golden State Warriors, who looked great in Game 1 and kind of did everything reline of Game 1, James Harden got his in isolation, had 41 points in that Game 1. Then you look at how balanced the Rockets' attack was here in Game 2. And I think more specifically, it's looking at the efficiency of players that haven't really given that level of efficiency yet this season, or this postseason, I should say, and certainly in Game 1. I mean, when you get 8 of 9 from the field, 5 of 6 from 3 from PJ Tucker, an uncharacteristic 22 points from him, getting 7 of 9 from the field from Trevor Ariza, who avoided foul trouble in this game and had 19 points to go, 4 rebounds, and even 6 assists. James Harden having 27 points and 10 rebounds, being able to have a bad shooting night, specifically 3 of 15 from three-point territory, to kind of be masked by what the Rockets were able to do outside of their primary contributors. And a big part of that was having Eric Gordon drop 27 off the bench and shoot 6 of 9 from 3. And the Rockets were around their season average for three-pointers and three-point percentage. They hit 16 last night on 42 attempts, so it's 38.1%. And what was perhaps most notable was just how different they played Golden State defensively. And it was a very definitive strategic change and kind of veering away from the problem that I think the Rockets have the most when matching up with a team like the Golden State Warriors, is that they inherently don't really pose any serious difficulties onto this team. However, in last night's game, there was a strategy change from Mike D'Antoni, and I really think for the most part, it was effective. The Warriors are continuing to start the death lineup, so having Andre Iguodala in there with Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Stephen Curry. But the Rockets were extremely aggressive with defending specifically Stephen Curry last night. And in 34 minutes, they limited him to 7 of 19 from the field, 1 of 8 from 3 with 16 points to go with 7 and 7. So certainly not the worst possible game, but really a very uncharacteristic game for Stephen Curry. And a lot of that was due to how PJ Tucker, Trevor Ariza, and Chris Paul were able to guard him. Eric Gordon as well, who is an underrated defender in my mind. And I really think that this balanced attack of throwing multiple bodies on everybody else in Golden State was really effective. And Kevin Durant was able to do what he does. He shot 13 to 22 from the field, had 38 points, 3 rebounds, but no assists, no steals, and no blocks. So he was really neutralized outside of the fact that he was scoring a lot. And the Rockets were simply letting that happen. He was the one playing in a lot of isolation last night for the Golden State Warriors. The ball movement that we have expected to see from Golden State in every game was not apparent last night, well short of their season averages, just shy of 30 assists. They had 21 last night. And then comparing that to the Rockets, who had a couple more, 23, a team that, while they moved the ball specifically just to create the best possible open look, they don't move the ball nearly as well as the Warriors do on most nights. So I think that that was the biggest problem that Golden State had yesterday, is that they were finally forced into some difficult positions as far as how well they were going to move the ball. And while Stephen Curry gave you 7 assists and Draymond Green had 6 as well, Green's line was actually 6-6-6, ironically enough, with 2 steals and 2 blocks. But, you get 6 assists from Draymond Green, you get 7 assists from Stephen Curry, but these eye-popping numbers, specifically off the bench, who only combined for 5 assists total, you need more than that. There's going to need to be more ball movement. We didn't see as many of the back cuts that we saw in Game 1 and in prior to this point in this postseason from the Golden State Warriors that wasn't really as evident here in last night's game. So while I haven't really changed my mind on the outcome of the series, I think it's still extremely possible that Golden State wins this in 5. And the reason for that being is how well everything had to go for the Rockets yesterday. And I'm not at all calling the Rockets a bad defensive team. In fact, they're very good. That's a fact. And I think it's been something that's been overlooked a lot this season. And what has been the biggest difference between the Rockets of this year and the Rockets of years past is that this year they are finally a very formidable defensive team. And that's something that certainly gets overlooked a lot. But when you're playing the Golden State Warriors, who are a better defensive team when it comes down to it, and especially we've seen that this postseason at several different times, it will start to be very difficult for the Houston Rockets, especially as we move later on to the series. I just believe that talent differential is going to become more and more noticeable, especially when it comes to shot making. Now, Houston was able to limit Golden State to 9 of 30 3-point shooting, but that's not going to consistently happen. And that Stephen Curry, while he was guarded very effectively, and I would expect that is going to be the game plan as well going into Game 3, you could certainly expect Golden State to try and implement their bench more into 3-point shooting. Klay Thompson only got 4 3-point attempts up last night in 37 minutes. So that is something that you will certainly can expect to see to change, especially because, Klay Thompson had a rough game last night, shooting 3 of 11 from the field in general, 2 of 4 from 3. But I think you're going to see more offensive aggression from him. And I think that there's going to be more plays set up to benefit Klay Thompson. And then that's where you really see the full extent of what makes the Warriors the Warriors. The Rockets had everything going right for them last night, and they were able to win a blowout game, winning by 22. But you can't expect PJ Tucker and Trevor Ariza to combine for 3 missed field goals between them. And last night was one of their nights where their streaky shooters were all on. You were getting big contributions from Tucker, Ariza, and Gordon. And while not really getting that much, at least long range wise, from James Harden and Chris Paul, who only combined for 4 3-pointers. So I don't think you can really expect the bench to give that kind of production, and the supporting cast, I should say, to give that kind of production moving forward. However, I think it is reasonable to expect that James Harden and Chris Paul should help kind of supplement what you'll be missing from the reduced production that we can just assume to happen from guys like Tucker, Ariza, and Gordon. However, if Houston continues to hit these shots as the series goes on, it's certainly not over. I just think it'll be very, very difficult for Houston to win more than one game going into Golden State. However, if they do win one game and reclaim home court advantage in the series, which they're already in a good position to do, considering that they're tied and it's a best of 5 now, they're going to need to find a way to win at least one of these games on the road and get it tied heading into Game 5. And while I think any way you cut it, the advantage of this series is going to lie with the Golden State Warriors, with the defending champions, with the team that, is still playing with house money. I think that at the end of the day, the Houston Rockets are certainly talented enough to beat this team. I just think it's going to come down to how consistently are they going to be able to hit shots. And at the end of the day, I don't believe that that's going to be something that they can replicate 3 more times throughout the course of the series. I just think that that's going to be extremely difficult for Houston, especially considering that when you're looking at what Golden State does and the level of talent that they have, specifically looking at Curry, Thompson, and Durant, you would have to figure that, throughout the rest of the course of the series, that group is probably more likely to carry their team to 3 victories more than the entourage of shooters that Houston has. And maybe it speaks to the fact that is a system that they simply play with, and that is what they're rolling with. And they really do believe that this is the best way to beat the Golden State Warriors, to beat them at what is mostly their game. But this Warriors team at the same time has its very significant differences from the teams that we've seen in 2016, 2017, that while they shoot 3-pointers at an incredibly high percentage, that the volume isn't quite what it was in 2016, 2017. Maybe some of that had to do specifically this year with Stephen Curry's injuries, but I certainly believe that Golden State can turn that part of their game up and outdo Houston with 3-point shooting on any given night. We kind of saw that in game one. And I think when you go back to the Oracle Arena, where it's such a hostile environment, specifically in the playoffs, I was talking about in the video yesterday how in the Steve Kerr era, Western Conference teams have only mustered 2 victories at the Oracle Arena, and that was the Oklahoma City Thunder winning once to open up that series in 2016 in the Western Conference Finals, and the Memphis Grizzlies winning Game 2 of the Western Conference Semifinals there in 2015. The Golden State Warriors defend their home floor incredibly well. I don't expect that to change. So I do think the Golden State's going to end up with a 3-1 lead in the series. And if you do get to that point, if Golden State does defend their home floor and you leave Houston in a position to where they are playing 3 elimination games if they're trying to win the series, it just goes to the point where it favors Golden State more and more. So I still expect them to win the series. In probably 6 at this point, because I do think it's reasonable to think that Houston can win one more game, whether that's going to be one in Golden State or a game 5 at home. I do think that they'll win another game at this point, but it would certainly not surprise me if Houston's knocked out in 5 in this series. Especially because of the amount of momentum that Golden State can carry into their home games and then carry that back out on the road into Houston for a game 5. It's just going to be really tough going on from here for Houston, even after the decisive victory last night. But I don't mean to take anything away from that, because that's certainly a very encouraging victory, beating a team like that by 22 points, kind of, taking the Thunder back in the series. But, with 5 games left, 5 potential games left in this series, you certainly want to put yourself in a position to where, you have the best chance to win. And that would have been the most ideal to, of course, take a 2-0 lead in the series, which they were unable to do. But I'm not exactly convinced that this strategy that Houston employed last night is going to work for the rest of the series. I think we've seen that when Stephen Curry has gotten shut down in the playoffs before, he's typically been able to rebound pretty well. I would assume that that's going to be the case, especially with Klay Thompson, who you're not going to expect another 8-point performance from. So I think those are the main things. But if you're the Houston Rockets, try and incorporate the other 3-point shooters in that lineup. A big thing last night was how small they played. You didn't see any Nene. You saw very little of Luke Ba-Mute. But if they do reincorporate guys like Ba-Mute and Ryan Anderson, who is a defensive liability for his position, but if they are going to put guys like that in the game, you have to make sure that if you're making those lineup changes, that they're going to be able to keep up that 3-point production. So if Golden State makes adjustments for the small lineups, that is the small rotations, I should say, that Houston used last night, it's going to be up to Mike D'Antoni and the Rockets to make sure that guys like Luke Ba-Mute, even Joe Johnson, certainly Gerald Green, who did not play very much last night as well, guys that are in that wing position to be able to be ready to come off the bench and produce from long range, because that is the name of the game for this team, and that is going to be what they're expected to do, because I think it's very reasonable to see that Steve Kerr is probably going to make some adjustments for the small lineups that Houston used. So, moving into game 3 on Sunday, those are all things to look out for. And I don't really expect any lineup changes from either of the teams. I certainly think that Golden State is going to continue starting the death lineup. I think with what they have right now, that's their best option. Of course, if you're able to afford starting somebody else and being able to have Iguodala come off the bench, it's a completely different dynamic. It's something that's been incredibly unique and helpful for the Warriors in the Steve Kerr era, to be able to have that level of a weapon coming off of the bench. But also at the same time, I think it's the best way to start their lineup this season. I don't think that Zaza Pachulia or JaVale McGee really play a good role in that starting lineup as far as setting the tone for games. And I think that the Warriors are really messing around in that regard. And I think that's certainly the best way to do it, considering that this lineup has been an absolute juggernaut, a historical juggernaut in this league now for the past 4 years. It was really a big part of what allowed them to win in 2015. Of course, that was with Harrison Barnes in the lineup and not Kevin Durant, which certainly makes a big difference. But this is a lineup that just size-wise makes things very difficult for everybody. And while it may not be personnel adjustments, there are going to be adjustments made for the lineup that Houston had. But, when you look at the athleticism and the speed that Golden State has over Houston at the end of the day, who's a relatively older team, I also think that as a series goes on, that will be something that will make more and more of a difference. So I'm still going with the Warriors in this, probably in 6, but it would not surprise me if the Warriors still won the series in 5 games. So there is that. Then there's also the NBA award finalists, which have been exciting and good to look at. The Rookie of the Year finalists, certainly not anything that surprising between Jason Tatum, Ben Simmons, and Donovan Mitchell. I did a little bit of I think I did videos before the playoffs briefly talking about who I liked in all of the awards. I'll just kind of go down the list and give a brief talk of who I like in the awards now that there's 3 finalists, aka know who the top 3 vote getters were. But for the Rookie of the Year, I did express I do like Donovan Mitchell for this award. I think Ben Simmons has had an incredible rookie season, but I think Donovan Mitchell, just looking at the expectation that the Utah Jazz had coming into the season, many believe that they were a lottery team. You lose Gordon Hayward, and then you get this Louisville product who comes in and instantly takes a role of being the number 1 option on a playoff team, on a second-round playoff team. And he's somebody that just was not at all afraid of the moment, was always ready to put up shots, and not a guy that's bothered by having a bad night. And I think those are all things that are so encouraging to see in a 21-year-old player. And I think that this gives the Jazz tremendous hope for the future. It's an incredible draft pick. I think that he should be the Rookie of the Year. That is, of course, not to take anything away from Ben Simmons. And then, of course, Jason Tatum as well, who entered a wonderful system and just fit like a glove and really took advantage of the opportunity that he had once Gordon Hayward went down and really made a name for himself and has continued to do that in the postseason. And while the postseason doesn't factor into it, I certainly think that speaks to how much he's grown as a player throughout the year. But I do like Donovan Mitchell in that. For most improved player, Clint Capella, Spencer Dinwiddie, Victor Oladipo. I got to go with Victor Oladipo, who I do think was always this talented. I just don't think that he was in a system ever to where he could flourish. I think the Magic gave up on him too early in that regard. And I think the Oklahoma City Thunder were just in a position to where that team was just so engineered around Russell Westbrook that a guy that's actually, as we've learned, to be a ball-dominant player, he just wasn't able to get those opportunities, wasn't able to get the same kind of looks that he's been able to engineer for himself in Indiana. So I certainly like Victor Oladipo for this award, who has blossomed into an all-star, an incredibly exciting player to watch, and a defensive juggernaut as well, somebody that led the league in steals. He's very quick, extremely athletic, can finish at the rim, can draw contact, really has all the skill set that you would like to see in a modern day combo guard. So I really like him, but that's not to take anything away, of course, from Spencer Dinwiddie, who has emerged as one of the league's better passers after being somebody that didn't know if he was going to be playing in the NBA throughout this entire season. And Clint Capella, who has just been such a big part in making that system work for Houston. But I like Oladipo for that award. For Sixth Man of the Year between Eric Gordon, Fred VanVleet, and Lou Williams. Tough to kind of judge Lou Williams in this regard because of how much he played, on top of the fact that he started a lot of games. Eric Gordon also started when James Harden and or Chris Paul were injured. And Fred VanVleet was the head of probably one of the best, if not the best bench in the NBA in the regular season. Eric Gordon was a winner of this award last year. I do probably have to go with Lou Williams for this award since he did qualify. I mean, just one of the most dynamic bench seasons we've seen from any player, at least probably in my lifetime. I don't have any other glaring examples I can think of off the top of my head, but this is somebody that was on a team that dealt with so many injuries, had a completely different looking team at the end of the season, what they had at the beginning of the year, and he ends up signing an extension midway through the season and kept them in the playoff race throughout. So just an incredibly impressive season from Lou Williams. I like him for that award. For Coach of the Year, between Dwayne Casey, Quinn Snyder, and Brad Stevens, I think there's a lot of coaches that certainly could have been nominated for this award that weren't. Nate McMillan is the first one that comes to my mind with what he was able to do with the Pacers team, losing a superstar and then ending up being a better team than they were the year before. Out of these three, I probably have to go with Quinn Snyder. I really, really admire what he did with that Utah Jazz team, who just dealt with a lot of injuries early on, were well below 500. And looked like they had no chance of making it into the playoffs. They end up as a 5 seed, were the hottest team in the NBA in the second half of the season, and then end up winning a playoff series against a team that had astronomically higher expectations, and then end up taking a game in Houston in a playoff series. So a really impressive year for Quinn Snyder. Of course, I've gone at length in many of my videos talking about how big Brad Stevens is for the Celtics. And despite the fact that Dwayne Casey was fired, he led that Raptors team in the regular season to be the best iteration of the Raptors that we had seen yet. But I do think that relative with what they were given and the adversity faced, I got to go with Quinn Snyder. I think that overall the Celtics faced more adversity, but I also think that you can't take credit away from the amount of talent that is still on that team, the amount of top of the line potential future superstar talent. I think that is something that is overlooked. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum were both third overall picks. These are guys that, are in that position, are typically drafted to be the face of the franchise. So they are certainly extremely talented, and I think both future all-stars, whereas Quinn Snyder kind of developed a future all-star in Donovan Mitchell and dealt with certainly a lot fewer tools and was able to make things happen and make them a second-round playoff team, which nobody anticipated. For Defensive Player of the Year, between Anthony Davis, Rudy Gobert, and Joel Embiid, it'll be a first-time winner. Whoever wins it, it's really tough. I would say Rudy Gobert if he played more games. I got to go with Anthony Davis, though, for a team that overall was not very good defensively, individually an incredible defender, and on top of being an MVP candidate and finalist, which he was somebody that really emerged as a top-of-the-line rim protector and defender who is athletic enough to guard multiple positions. And in that regard, it's almost as if he's a bigger LeBron. And there have been comparisons, especially when he was first coming up to LeBron James, not as much now. But he's become really the most prolific shot blocker in the league. And when you add that on top of the fact that he is quick enough to stay with everybody that he's guarding, that he is capable of guarding athletic wings, it's really incredible to think of what Anthony Davis is able to do at this level. I think Rudy Gobert had the more impressive season and did more for his team, but at the same time, you can make that same case for Anthony Davis, who stepped it up on both ends of the floor even more after DeMarcus Cousins went down. So he's my winner there. For Defensive Player of the Year. And then for MVP, between Anthony Davis, James Harden, and LeBron James. James Harden is presumptively going to win the award. However, if I were voting for it, I would personally vote for LeBron James, just because I think if you take James Harden, if we're really assessing this award on who is the most valuable, I think if you remove James Harden from the equation, in Houston, there's certainly still enough talent on that team to make things happen. I think Anthony Davis certainly deserves more consideration than what he's probably going to get, just considering that the Pelicans looked like they were going to be dead after losing DeMarcus Cousins for the season, considering that they were kind of on the playoff bubble to begin with. And then he was able to really lead them on an incredible stretch. Of course, Rajon Rondo and Drew Holiday deserve their due credit, as does Alvin Gentry for that. But Anthony Davis on both ends of the floor just stepped up and really made himself a freak of nature, made himself a superstar, did some just incredible things. He's really one of my favorite players to watch. And I think this is the heir to LeBron James. I think that once if it ever does happen, which it will, Father Time is undefeated as much as LeBron James is challenging it. But once LeBron James inevitably does decline, I think that Anthony Davis is the heir to be the greatest player in the world. I don't think he's quite there yet, obviously, but this being a big accomplishment to be a top 3 MVP finish, and I certainly think it's well-deserved. And I think James Harden, as I said, is going to win the award, but if we're looking at true value, I mean, LeBron James, if you were to take him off of this Cleveland Cavaliers team, they'd certainly be a lottery team, I think. And with the amount of discord that existed on the team to begin with and how LeBron James has been able to at least settle some of that down has been absolutely incredible. And the fact that he's been able to take this team even to the conference finals really speaks to just how great of a player that he is. And I've gone so much at length talking about his greatness, but I do believe that he is the MVP in the league this year. I know you can make that argument every year, but I think especially this year without Kyrie Irving, with losing Kevin Love for big parts of the season and playing 82 games, something that he had never done before in his 15th season at the age of 33. Truly an incredible year for LeBron James, and I have him as my MVP. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in. I may or may not have a video tomorrow. Depends what goes on in baseball tonight or if there's any other big storylines to talk about. But the next basketball game is not until Saturday night. That's game 3 between Cleveland and Boston, and then game 3 between Golden State and Houston goes on Sunday. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in. This has been Peter Marzano with another episode of Pick and Pop. Enjoy the rest of your morning.